It's 6 o'clock in the morning, okay? Dedicated. Hi guys, welcome back to another episode of Crue Trime. Crue Trime. Crue Trime. My name is Sarah, and what I do here is tell you a terrible story to ruin your day. And put on my makeup at the same time. So if that sounds like a fun combination to you, you are in the right place. So make sure you subscribe to this channel, hit the bell notification, and then that way you will never miss one of my terrible stories. I also have a pretty exciting announcement to make, but you're gonna have to wait until the end of the video to hear it because I'm so cheeky. We are gonna go across the pond today, friends, and this story is really bad. Okay, so hold on to your bums. This is the story of Suzanne Capper. On the morning of December 14th, 1992, in Manchester, England, Barry Sutcliffe was on his way to work with two other co-workers in the car. He was driving down Compstall Road, a narrow lane at Warneth Low on the outskirts of Stockport. Here's a map for reference. So as they were driving along, Barry saw an injured girl lying on the side of the road, so they decided to stop and help. 16-year-old Suzanne Capper had been badly burned, and it was obvious to everyone that something terrible had happened to her. So Barry and his friends got the young girl to the nearest house, waking them up. It was early in the morning, right? So this was the home of Michael and Margaret Coop. They, of course, welcomed Suzanne into their home, and then they called 999 for her. That's the equivalent of 911 for us over here in North America. Margaret said that her first instinct was to wrap her arms around the girl and comfort her, but when she did, Suzanne winced and pulled back, saying that she hurt everywhere. So Suzanne explained to this group of Good Samaritans that she had been held captive, tortured, and then set on fire. Holy shit. Michael later described that they had offered her glass after glass of water, like 6 glasses of water, and she was just like chugging them down due to how badly her hands were damaged, from the burns. They had to hold the glass for her. Also, everyone in the room was struck with how polite and kind she was. Here she was having been brutally attacked in terrible condition, and yet she's still saying thank you to them. Thank you for helping me. Thank you for saving me. Thank you for having me in your home. The ambulance finally arrived and transported Suzanne to Stockport Infirmary. And remarkably, the police were actually able to speak with her when she arrived. And she told them the names of the 6 people who did that to her. They had tortured her and tried to kill her. And she gave them the address, the details, all of it. Shortly after the police left, she was life-flighted to the specialist burn unit at Whittington, but on December 18th, 1992, after being placed in a medically induced coma, she passed away from her injuries. So, who was Suzanne Capper and what the F happened? I'm glad you asked. Suzanne Jane Jones was born on September 1st, 1976 in Manchester, England, to a single mom, Elizabeth Dunbar. She also had an older sister named Michelle, and unfortunately, Suzanne's father had run off before she was even born, so she never even knew who he was. Elizabeth later married a man named John Capper, who adopted the girls and gave them his last name. There's not a whole lot of information about her actual childhood, but it seemed, average, normal, quiet. When Suzanne was about 14 years old, Elizabeth and John divorced. Elizabeth actually ran off to go live with a new boyfriend, and she left the girls behind with John. So, Suzanne was described as a quiet, kind, and extremely polite child. She just wanted somebody to love her. But she was let down again and again by everyone, including her own parents. There's some mixed information about this in the research, but some sources say that after the divorce, Suzanne and Michelle spent some time in state care and then did a lot of couch surfing. But other sources say that she and her sister just lived with their adopted dad. But either way, the mom was not really a fixture in their life at that point. Which, that's rough, man. That's a hard time for a girl. Teen years, it's rough. So Suzanne attended Moston High School, and she was an excellent student. As I mentioned, Suzanne was a lonely kid, desperate for love and attention. And that made her very vulnerable. she didn't always make the best choices. She was a child, after all. So while in high school, about 1992, the now 16-year-old Suzanne started dating a 17-year-old boy named Clifford Pook. He was the much younger brother of a gal who actually used to babysit her when she was little. Her name was Jean. So Clifford's older sister, Jean Powell, she was 26 years old and a single mom of 3 children. Well, Suzanne had actually become the babysitter for her kids in the last couple of years, and they'd come to sort of like a mutually beneficial arrangement. Suzanne watched the kids in exchange for being allowed to live there, like for free, but that's not really free. It's work. Anyway, it was a win-win, I guess, and Suzanne's sister, Michelle, also lived there for a short time, but I'll come back to that. So Suzanne was spending a lot of time with Jean and started seeing Jean sort of like as a mother figure. She even started calling her mom. But she was at best a bad influence and at worst a criminal. Jean didn't have like a traditional job or a steady job, I should say. Instead, she sold drugs, moved stolen goods, even stolen cars. She was extremely manipulative, very good at like judging a person and gauging what she could take from them. And she didn't bat an eye at doing it at all. People close to her would later say that she was a wolf in sheep's clothing. Because Suzanne was so desperate for love that she saw Jane as a mother figure, she did anything that Jane asked. Anything. Not only was she taking care of these kids for free, she was also taking care of the house, doing the cooking and the cleaning, and eventually Jean convinced her to drop out of high school. So she did. Jean would also sometimes, get work cleaning houses, and she'd have Suzanne go to work with her and then keep nearly all of her paycheck. But, sweet little Suzanne was more than happy for it, and, she loved Jean and the kids, and feeling like she was part of a group. Speaking of the group, there are a few more people we haven't talked about yet. So Jean's best friend was 24-year-old Bernadette McNeely, who also was a single mom raising 3 children on her own, and she had just recently moved into the same neighborhood as Jean. In fact, just like a few doors down on the same street. Jean lived at 97 Langworthy Road, and Bernadette lived at 91 Langworthy Road. So we'll just call them number 97, number 91. So remember, Jean was the wolf in sheep's clothing, right? So she could at least pretend to not be an asshole. But Bernadette could not.
Okay, I need to transcend.
Bernadette was essentially like one of those neighbors from hell. She was aggressive, combative, she would start fights with people, set their clothes that were hanging on the clothesline, set them on fire.
Well, something's off then because I'm just not feeling it.
She was confrontational, manipulative, and into some pretty serious drugs. Well, Jean and Bernadette were besties. Now, this is around the time that Suzanne's sister Michelle decided that she didn't want anything to do with the craziness going on around that house, so she left. Eventually, Bernadette and her 3 kids moved in with Jean at number 97. Bernadette's place, number 91, just kind of sat empty. So, with everybody now living together, things got more intense. There were more drug transactions and shady characters always coming and going, and there were kids everywhere. Bernadette and Jean actually shared a bed down in the living room because the bedrooms were like filled with children. The kitchen was cluttered with scales for weighing drugs. There were stolen car parts all over the house. There were car seats sitting around, for people to sit on. I mean, the place was a shithole. Well, Jean's ex-husband, 29-year-old Glenn Powell, also stayed at the apartment sometimes. Now, they were divorced, and he had his own place to live, but he and Jean were on friendly terms. And he stayed at number 97 most of the time. And Glenn was, as you might guess, a shady character. He had a pretty lengthy criminal record of, burglary and theft and the like. But you know what? So did everybody. Jean's younger brother and Suzanne's sometimes boyfriend Clifford stayed at the apartment most of the time, and he helped with the drug dealing. And Bernadette's child boyfriend, 16-year-old Anthony Dudson, also lived there. She's 26, he's 16. And another shithead, 27-year-old Jeffrey Lee, he did not live there, but he did spend, a lot of time there. He was a regular drug customer. He actually had a conviction for stealing money from his 86-year-old disabled aunt. So, a delight. Did I mention that they were all having sex with each other?
What?
Jean was, doing the sex with all of them, except her brother. Thank God. It's not clear if these were group activities or if they were just approved arrangements. It doesn't matter. The point is, everybody knew what was going on, who was doing who, and it was fine. And they were all out of their minds on drugs. All of them except for Suzanne. So once Bernadette moved into the house, things changed a lot for Suzanne. She became the scapegoat for all of the problems. If something went missing from the house, Jean and Bernadette would blame Suzanne. Never mind the fact that the house was filled with criminals. Jean would complain that Suzanne wasn't doing enough to take care of the kids and the house, but then they started physically abusing her also. These two, adult women would scream at this teenage girl on a daily basis. They would hit her and beat her for any little thing that happened, usually for things that weren't her fault. So eventually Suzanne was covered in bruises. She never fought back, ever. She never questioned her punishments or tried to leave. She just tried to do better, be better. She didn't want to lose them. So pitiful. There was actually one time that she attempted to leave. In late November 1992, she showed up to the Calderwood Day Center where her mom worked. She was covered in bruises and she had a black eye, and her mom said, "Been fighting over the boys then?" And Suzanne just shrugged her shoulders. Well, Suzanne asked to move in with Elizabeth, but Elizabeth had just moved into this apartment like that day, or maybe the day before, so she needed a little bit of time to get a room ready for her. So Suzanne was actually supposed to move in on Christmas Day. So that night, Suzanne went to go stay with her dad. Okay, so Suzanne was at John's house, her dad's house, for a couple of days, and that really made Bernadette and Jean mad. Their punching bag was gone, and they had no one else to take things out on. Also, while Suzanne was gone, supposedly an expensive pink jacket of Bernadette's went missing. Again, it's a house full of thieves. Then something ridiculous happened. There was a crabs outbreak among Jean, Bernadette, Anthony, and Glenn. Pubic lice, crotch crickets, cheesy bugs, weenie sprinkles. I could go on. Rug bugs, scabies, willipedes, galloping dandruff, bush fairies. Why is that so entertaining to me? Because I'm 14 years old forever, I guess. Anyway, I know, you're just shocked that there was an STD outbreak among these upstanding young citizens. Well, anyways, they decided, it was, of course, Suzanne's fault. I mean, by their shithead math, I guess. Well, Suzanne wasn't a participant in their reindeer games, and they all knew that, but they decided that she must have slept on one of the mattresses, and that's how it passed to them, which is not at all how that works.
That's not how it works. That's not how any of this works.
Anyway, these twits decided that they wanted revenge on Suzanne. Suzanne wasn't living there anymore, or hadn't been there for some time. She hadn't had sex with anyone, but let's not get hung up on facts. Okay. Well, on December 9th, 1992, Jean and Bernadette went to see Suzanne at her dad's house, and they had a plan to lure her back home with them. They told Suzanne that a boy that she had a crush on was at their apartment, had come to see her. And of course, he was very cute, and he liked her, and he just wanted to get to know her, maybe even take her out on a date. Well, this ruse worked perfectly. All Suzanne ever wanted was love and attention. And here's somebody wants to give her love and attention, so Suzanne went with them. Well, she was barely inside number 97 when Glenn and Anthony grabbed her. They restrained Suzanne and dragged her into the kitchen. And she, of course, was in shock because she didn't know what was going on. They didn't tell her that there was a problem or that they were even mad at her. So there she was, being jumped on, held down, and attacked by people that she considered friends, even family. Well, after Glenn and Anthony dragged her into the kitchen, they held her down while they shaved off her hair and eyebrows. Then, while they all watched, they made her shave off her own short and curlies. And Suzanne didn't fight back. She complied, confused. Then they forced her to clean up all of this hair, and then they put a plastic bag over her head and dragged her through the house, beating on her. Over the next few hours, they, took turns torturing her, kicking, whipping, hitting with belts, hitting with belt buckles. There was a large ornamental wooden spoon, the kinds that hang on the kitchen walls. Well, they took that down and beat her with that, which they just thought was hilarious. They were laughing while they took turns just hurting her. She was injured so badly at one point that her arm was limp, couldn't lift it, couldn't move it at all. Well, eventually Suzanne passed out, and Jean and Bernadette stuffed her into a cupboard under the stairs and left her there all night. At some point she woke up. She was screaming, she was crying. Well, the next morning they decided that they needed to move her somewhere else because these terrible women were annoyed that Suzanne's cries were upsetting the children. They were annoyed by this. Well, remember, Bernadette's place down number 91 was sitting there empty, so they decided to take her down there. Now, warning, 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 warning. It's about to get really bad. So if you want to skip those level of details, skip ahead to this timestamp. Okay, so this group of monstrous, inhuman shitheads dragged Bernadette down to number 91. They put her in a bedroom that had only a broken box spring in it. So they laid her down on the wooden slats, springs facing up. They tied her down, spread eagle, with an electrical cord, and they left her like that for 4 days. She was given no food, no water, no ability to use the bathroom. They forced a sock in her mouth, blindfolded her, and then put headphones on her, like our head. This little psychological torture was Bernadette's idea. So this was 1992. They had like the equivalent of a Walkman. So for all of you youngins, this is a Walkman. It's a cassette music player with headphones. Well, this cassette was one that they had made themselves. It was a rave remix, and it had samples from the movie Child's Play. In the music, you can just hear Chucky, the doll,
Hi, I'm Chucky. Wanna play?
over and over. Okay, the song is like 5 minutes long, played on the tape, repeat. So Suzanne is gagged, blindfolded, tied to this broken box spring, beaten horribly, and they turn this music volume all the way up in her ears. The only time the music stopped was when they were coming in to actually torture her. And when they did this, Bernadette would always start with, taking the headphones off and then whispering in Bernadette's ears, "Hi, I'm Chucky. Wanna play?" Well, of course, Suzanne would start screaming because she knew what was coming, which was, I guess, a delight to Bernadette. They did just unimaginable, terrible things to her, including putting out cigarettes on her body, on her forehead, and they didn't like it when Suzanne would pass out from the pain. So they started injecting her with amphetamines. All 6 people of this group had joined in on these beatings and torture at some point. Jean Powell, Bernadette McNeely, Glenn McNeely, Anthony Dudson, Clifford Pook, and Jeffrey Lee. Clifford tried to pull Suzanne's teeth out with pliers. All he did was really just break them off, leaving the nerves exposed. And by the time he had started this nightmare dentistry, Suzanne had been held down captive for about 3 days. So she's lying there, in her own filth. But the guys didn't like that, so they stripped her down, took her to the bathroom, and put her in the bathtub. They poured concentrated disinfectant all over her body, which must have burned like a bitch, going into all of her cuts and abrasions. Then they took a stiff brush and scrubbed her skin. And they scrubbed it so hard that, of course, some of it came off. Then they, took her back and tied her up on the box spring again. Later that day, one of their friends, 18-year-old David Hill, stopped by to see the group. He heard some ruckus, some sounds, and he asked what was going on. Jeffrey and Anthony not only told him exactly what was going on, they took him to the room and just casually showed him as if it wasn't an actual horror scene. Well, they told David they needed to run out for a bit, go get a fucking Eskimo pie or something. And they asked David to keep an eye on Suzanne. So he did. While they were gone, David actually spoke with Suzanne, found out her name. She begged him for help, begged him to let her go or just tell someone or just get help. He told her, sorry, can't do that. After David left number 91 that day, he never told anybody what he had seen. He later would say that he was afraid of what the 6 people would do to him. I mean, all he had to do was call the police, but okay. Well, after 5 days of being gone, remember, she had been living with her dad, he started to worry. It was pretty common for her to go stay at Jean's, house for days at a time, but he hadn't heard from her at all. Michelle actually came by Jean's place number 97 to see if Jean had heard from her, and she, of course, hadn't seen her. Had no idea where she was. When Michelle was leaving, she told Jean that she was going to report Suzanne as a missing person. And it's because of this that the group of shitheads decided they needed to figure out what they were going to do with her. Thing is, they probably could have let her go, and the chances of her telling the police were probably pretty slim. But Jean and Bernadette decided they needed to kill Suzanne. So, on the morning of December 14th, 1992, the group moved Suzanne again. They took her out and put her inside the boot of the car, similar to this. Glenn was the driver. Bernadette was in the passenger seat. Jean and Anthony were in the back seat. According to the testimony at the trial, Bernadette and Jean were giggling in the car ride out to the countryside. When they got to the remote wooded area outside of Manchester, they took Suzanne out of the boot. So Suzanne, shaved, beaten, tortured, scrubbed, psychologically traumatized, injected with drugs, starving and dehydrated, but somehow still alive. So they were up at the top of an embankment, so they just pushed her and watched her tumble down the hill. Then the 4 of them walked down the hill with Bernadette carrying a jerry can. She poured petrol all over Suzanne, and then she told Glenn and Anthony to light her on fire. It took several attempts, but eventually the fire did ignite. And then the 4 of them laughed and giggled as they walked calmly up the hill, while Bernadette sang the chorus from the song Disco Inferno. Well, as we know, Suzanne was still alive. She used her hands to put the fire out on her body, and then she started crawling up the embankment. She had to crawl some 400 yards up the hill to get to the edge of the road, where she was found by Barry. Thank you, Barry. You are a hero. Suzanne lived for 2 days in the burn unit, but she was already in multiple organ failure when she got to the hospital, before she then passed away. But remember, she had been able to speak to the police before it was too late. She told those investigators exactly who hurt her, what they did to her, and gave them the exact address to find them. By 7:30 a.m., the police had actually showed up at the door at old number 97. Armed with a search warrant, they got inside and pretty quickly found Suzanne's hair and blood and teeth. Then they searched number 91 and found that fucking horror scene. The broken box spring, the blood, all that. The whole lot of shitheads were arrested and charged with a bunch of crimes, including kidnapping, false imprisonment, attempted murder. Never mind this mountain of forensic evidence. They denied having any involvement. They certainly had no idea what happened to Suzanne. But then enter Anthony Dudson's father. So Anthony was a proper piece of shit, but his father got in his ear and told him that he needed to cooperate. In fact, most of the details from the story come from his statement, which was corroborated by the physical evidence and also Suzanne's story. The lead detective inspector on this case later said that they just couldn't believe the story that they were hearing. How could one human being do something like this to another? The police were actually so disturbed by what happened to Suzanne that they collected cash to send flowers to her while she was hospitalized. After Suzanne succumbed to her injuries, the attempted murder charges were later changed. Straight up murder. It took about a year for the cases to go to trial. It began on November 16th, 1993 and lasted 22 days. It was a mess. Each one of the shitheads played down their role in what occurred and, pointed the blame at the other. For example, Bernadette said that she gave Suzanne the injection of amphetamines to help Suzanne, because if she didn't, the other ones were going to inject her with heroin. Because somehow that's better?
That makes no fucking sense!
Deliberations began on December 16th, 1993, and it lasted almost 10 hours before they finally reached a verdict. Jean Powell, Glenn Powell, Bernadette McNeely, and Anthony Dudson were found guilty of murder, false imprisonment, and conspiracy to cause grievous bodily harm. Clifford Pook was found guilty of conspiracy to cause grievous bodily harm. He confessed to pulling out her teeth, and he was found guilty of false imprisonment, but was acquitted of murder. He wasn't there at that time. Jeffrey Lee was found guilty of false imprisonment, but was acquitted of the other charges. As for the sentences, Jean Powell, Bernadette McNeely, and Glenn Powell were all given life with a minimum of 25 years. Anthony Dudson was given life with a minimum of 18 years. Clifford Pook was given 15 years for this grievous bodily harm, and Jeffrey Lee was given 12 years for false imprisonment. Her Majesty's Prison Service, now His Majesty's Prison Service, they're pretty big on rehabilitation in England and Wales, so whole life tariffs, like mandatory life sentences, pretty rare. Also, the offender has to be at least 21 years old at the time of the offense to even be eligible for it. Just a little nugget. There are only 65 prisoners in England and Wales with such a sentence currently, but that's come a long way from how things used to be. Until 1957, the mandatory penalty for adults who committed murder was death by hanging. In 1957, that's only like 60-ish years ago? Okay, so they all got sent to prison one way or another. The lovely and charming Bernadette McNeely, she got herself into a little bit of a pickle when she was serving her sentence at Her Majesty's Prison Durham. During a routine security check in 1996, love letters were discovered. Love letters between Bernadette and the prison warden. This very married officer resigned before any disciplinary action could be taken, and Bernadette was transferred to a different prison. Jeffrey Lee served 12 years and was released on parole in 1998. Clifford Pook served 15 years and was released on parole in May of 2001. Anthony Dudson served 20 years and was released in 2013. And in 2014, 21 years into her sentence, Bernadette was given parole due to good behavior.
I'm sure you are very popular.
In 2017, Jean Powell was released after serving 24 years, and Glenn Powell was released on parole just a few months ago, in May of 2023. He served 30 years. And that is the story of Suzanne Capper. If you're interested to know any of the makeup that I used in today's look, just look down in the description box because everything is linked, including my nail color for once. This one's cool, huh? It's shifty. Can you see the shift? So I mentioned earlier that I have something very exciting to announce, and if you've stuck around all the way to the end, you're really gonna like this. You guys have been asking for Hold On To Your Butts merch for so long, and I haven't been able to figure out how to do it until now. Inspired by the iconic New York City subway system as designed by the incredible Massimo Vignelli, behold the subway shirts. So every subway station sign tells you where you're going and what train is going to take you there. This is not a real subway sign. This is a very silly shirt that says butts on it. Now, I love this design, but if you don't want a shirt with the word butts on it, I got you. There's also Better Off Red. I'm realizing now that I only purchased the butts design, probably because of who I am as a person. Anyway, these designs are live in the Threadless storefront. It's available in a variety of unisex apparel. I mean, it says men's and women's, but it's very unisex. There's crew neck sweatshirts, there's pullover hoodies, there's long sleeve t-shirts, regular t-shirts. There's also buttons, zip up pouches, mouse pads, and coffee mugs. So get them while they're good. Everything is linked down below. Thank you so much for hanging out today and for watching this video. I really appreciate it. If you want to see more videos like this one, then consider subscribing to this channel before you leave today. I upload new videos here on YouTube every week, and you can follow me on all of the other socials as well. That is it for now. I will catch you next time in the next video. Bye! It's 6 o'clock in the morning. I'm a little tired. Murray, don't start. I won't stop twitching. That's fun. No, that's not what she said. All right. And had to get up and change my memory card. Already starting off great. September, nope. Now the litter box is going. Charge. My voice is a little deep. Motherfucker. Look at that eye twitch.